In this video lecture, we'll review the cognitive perspective on depression and discuss several cognitive models of major depression. So remember, in our general cognitive model, the relationship between life events and the behaviors we engage in response and the way that we feel about those events is mediated by the way we think about those experiences. So we've got the ABCs of behavior and emotions. The A is our activating event. That's the thing that we experience. The B is our beliefs or ways that we interpret the event. And that leads to C, the consequences. And those can include the emotional consequences, how we feel, and also behaviors, how we respond. So we'll be talking about three different cognitive models of depression. We'll talk about the role of information processing. We'll talk about Beck's negative cognitive triad, and we'll talk about attributional style theory. You might sometimes see attributional style theory referred to as reformulated learned helplessness theory, because Seligman, when he added a cognitive component to the behavioral learned helplessness model, discussed attributional style theory as a reformulated theory of learned helplessness that incorporated this cognitive component. One way of thinking about the role of cognition in depression is to focus on abnormalities or dysfunctions of information processing, so biases in the way that we process or obtain information. One thing we know about depression is that we see abnormalities in attention, and in particular, when an individual is in a negative mood state, we see enhanced attention to negative stimuli. For example, if I were in a depressed mood and talking to a class on Zoom, I might have enhanced attention to individuals who are not paying attention, who are not making eye contact, who have a negative or bored facial expression, or I might be highly attuned to things like people leaving the Zoom session in the middle of a class. So this enhanced attention to negative stimuli could give me more exposure to negative events and negative experiences. So these attentional biases can play a role in generating negative mood and maintaining negative mood. Another bias in information processing has to do with what is called state-dependent memory. So one of my favorite studies to illustrate state-dependent memory has nothing to do with mood. So this is a study that was conducted looking at the effects of alcohol on memory and recall. So in this experiment, they took a group of students and they gave these students information to learn. These students were divided into two groups. One group was given alcohol before they learned the information, and the other group learned the information sober. They brought them back later to test them on what they remembered from this initial phase. And in the testing phase, they divided each group in half again. Half of the participants received alcohol before the test, and half did not. So you might expect, based on what we know about alcohol, that everyone who was given alcohol during the testing phase would have lower recall and demonstrate lower memory or less learning than those who took the test when they were sober. Surprisingly, we see an interaction, and this interaction is consistent with state-dependent memory. So what we observed was that individuals had the best performance on the learning task when the state in which they took the test was the same as the state in which they initially learned the material. So if a participant learned the material after consuming alcohol, they did better on the test if they also consumed alcohol for the test than if they took the test sober. Individuals who learned the material when they were sober did better on the test when they took the test sober compared to if they consumed alcohol before taking the test. So this suggests that memory is facilitated by being in the same state that you were in when you initially had an experience. And the way that this is relevant to depression is that we can consider depressed mood to be a state. So when an individual is in a negative mood state, they exhibit enhanced memory for negative events and diminished memory for positive events. And they are more likely to remember things from other periods of time in which they have been in a depressed mood, and they will have less access to memories from periods of time where they were not in a depressed mood. So these biases in memory can lead to more negative experiences and more negative cognition. So these biases in information processing can contribute to and maintain depressive symptoms. Another cognitive model of depression is BECK'S negative cognitive triad. Aaron Beck is one of the early and most influential founders of cognitive models of emotional disorders. In the 1960s, when Beck was beginning his career as a psychologist, the psychodynamic model was one of the more prominent models in training and in clinical work. So Beck was trained from a psychodynamic perspective, but he started noticing when he was working with clients, particularly clients with depression, that he was observing patterns in the ways that they thought about things that seemed characteristic of their depression and that seemed to be playing an important role. And based on these experiences, he developed a model of depression that emphasized the role of these patterns of beliefs. So what he observed is that his patients with depression had a set of negative beliefs in key domains. These included negative views of the self. So his clients had low self-esteem, they viewed themselves negatively, they saw themselves as incompetent, they had negative beliefs about the world, and they also had negative beliefs about the future. So in Beck's negative cognitive triad, depression results from a set of negative beliefs in these key domains that perpetuate the symptoms of depression. And then finally, we can talk about attributional style theory, sometimes called reformulated learned helplessness theory. So according to attributional style theory, depressive symptoms can be explained by patterns in the attributions that individuals make for events. So attributions are our explanations for why events happen. And we can characterize our attributions on 3 dimensions. One dimension is whether our explanation is internal or external. Is our explanation something about ourselves that is internal to us? Or is our explanation external, something out there in the world? We can also characterize attributions as stable or unstable. Stable attributions are explanations that are likely to continue in the future over time and not be changed. Unstable attributions are things that are likely to change over time and may not be likely to recur in the future. And then finally, we can characterize our attributions as global or local. Global attributions have to do with characteristics that will apply to other events or in other domains, and local attributions have to do with things that are specific to particular circumstances or events. In attributional style theory, we notice differences between depressed and non-depressed individuals in the kinds of attributions or explanations they make for positive and negative life events. So individuals who are not depressed tend to explain positive events as occurring due to internal, stable, and global causes, and they explain negative events as occurring due to external, unstable, and local causes. We see the opposite when we look at individuals who are depressed. So when individuals who are depressed experience a negative life event, their attributions tend to be internal, stable, and global. In contrast, when a person who is depressed experiences a positive event, their explanations tend to be external, unstable, and local. So from an attributional style theory perspective, depressive symptoms result from these patterns of internal, stable, and global attributions for negative events paired with external, unstable, and local attributions for positive events. To illustrate this, we can look at examples of the kinds of attributions depressed and non-depressed individuals might make for different kinds of events. So let's start with a positive event. You get an A on a paper in a challenging class with a professor who's a notoriously hard grader. An individual who is not depressed might have an attribution or an explanation where they think, I'm a really excellent writer. So this is internal, it's about them. It is stable. Being an excellent writer is a stable characteristic of the self. And it is global. It's not just that they were good on this paper or in this class, but being an excellent writer is a skill that might generalize in other contexts. In contrast, a depressed individual might explain this by thinking, my professor must not have read this paper very closely. So this is external. It's about the professor, not about the student. It is unstable. There's no reason to expect that this is going to occur again in the future. And it's local. It's about this paper, not about their academic abilities or performance in general. In contrast, we can consider a negative life event. So you've been looking for a job unsuccessfully for some time. A non-depressed individual might explain this by saying, the job market is really bad right now. So many people are unemployed. So this is external. It's about the job market, not about the individual. It's unstable. The job market is bad right now, but there's no reason to expect that the job market will be bad forever. And it is local. So this is about the job market, but it's not about their worth as a person in general. In contrast, a depressed individual might interpret this by saying, I'm such an incompetent person. Nobody is ever going to be stupid enough to hire me. So this negative event is attributed to an internal cause. Being incompetent is something about the person. It is stable, so being incompetent is likely to continue over time, even explicitly thinking, no one will ever hire me because I will always be incompetent. And it's global. It's not just about their ability to be hired, but they are judging their incompetence as a person. So this is likely to affect multiple domains. So for attributional style theory, understanding an individual's pattern of attributions or explanations that they make for positive and negative life events can help us understand the development and maintenance of their symptoms of depression.